The year 1906 brought about a tremendous change in terms of naval history. Dreadnought, the battleship that changed everything. Her all big gun design, machinery, and fire control. It was all just so revolutionary. However, another ship that changed naval history was under construction that year, HMS Invincible, the world's first battlecruiser. This battlecruiser changed naval warfare in her own right. She was fast, even faster than Dreadnought. She was heavily armed too. It's just that her armor wasn't the same, being significantly weaker. But that was no problem, as Invincible and the other battlecruisers that followed her weren't meant to take on battleships, just armed merchant raiders and cruisers. As we know, that wasn't the case. Still, in today's video, we'll be taking a look at the design of the world's first battlecruiser, HMS Invincible. Originally, I was going to cover the designs of both Dreadnought and Invincible, as they're both intertwined. But that would have been a really long video, and something I couldn't produce. So, in part 2, we'll look at Invincible. Anyway, the idea of both ships came in part from the ever-forward-thinking and somewhat crazy mind of Admiral John Jackie Fisher. Fisher had many ideas, and one of those ideas was the battlecruiser. The idea of battlecruisers was something that came about in the 1890s and into the early 1900s, with the main proponent being Admiral Fisher. Admiral Fisher had the idea that speed was armor, a dictum that he found apt to use to describe how he felt Britain should develop a new type of capital ship, where the basics of what he wanted was a ship with a high speed, heavily armed, and lightly armored, where I think it's appropriate to discuss several definitions of a battlecruiser. Merriam-Webster defines a battlecruiser as a large, heavily armed warship that is lighter, faster, and more maneuverable than a battleship. While Google says a battlecruiser is a type of large warship that was popular in the early 20th century, particularly during World War I. It combines the firepower of a battleship with the speed of a cruiser, but with less armor protection. Essentially, it's a faster, less armored version of a battleship. Very interesting definitions. Let me know what you think about them down below, but like I said, the gist of what Fisher wanted was a ship with high speeds, heavily armed, and lightly armored. But for what purpose, and what are some of his specifications? To take from Admiral Sir Bacon in the Life of Lord Fisher of Kilverston, 1929, as found in British Battlecruisers 1905 to 1920 by John Roberts, the Invincible had a totally different genesis from the Dreadnought. She was designed in order to meet a want that had long been felt but never supplied, namely a ship fast enough to hunt down any armed merchant ship afloat and at the same time to be able to fight any cruiser abroad. The word fight, with Fisher, meant to crush. With him, there was no question of designing a cruiser equal in strength and speed to that of the enemy, for then the result of an action might be uncertain. His contention was that we should be superior to the enemy in numbers and guns, in hitting power, in speed, and in personnel, and then, and only then, could the people of this country sleep peacefully in their beds. So Fisher wanted a ship to handle the ever-increasingly large armored cruisers of the world, such as the Tsukuba and Ikoma ordered by Japan in 1904, armed with a main battery of 12-inch guns, and a secondary battery of 6-inch guns, what really could be considered the world's first battlecruisers, re-rated as such once the British launched the Invincible. But that's not really the point of our story, so let's move on. Anyway, Fisher wanted ships to hunt down and face armored cruisers, commerce raiders, and the like. He had proposals dating to before Invincible, something akin to even larger armored cruisers, armed with such calibers as 7.5-inch guns and 9.2-inch guns. A break for the idea of the battlecruiser came in 1904 when Fisher became First Sea Lord of the Admiralty. Fisher had been keeping up with designs with his post as Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet. So to this end, Fisher started to take steps to create his battlecruiser. To take from John Roberts in British Battlecruisers 1905 to 1920, the radical nature of the proposed shipbuilding policy, which included destroyers and submarines, but no intermediate cruiser type, was bound to spark controversy. In response, Fisher and the board established a committee on designs to formally examine the requirements for future warships. In reality, the committee's primary function was to ratify decisions that had already been made, while also blunting direct criticism of both the board and Fisher himself. The committee did produce useful technical work, particularly in refining armament arrangements and machinery layouts for the new armored ships. but it exerted little real influence over the broader direction of policy. Its basic requirements were set by Fisher from the start, and it was not given the freedom to operate outside the parameters laid down by the Board of the Admiralty appointed on 22 December 1904. The committee consisted largely of Fisher's close advisors and a small number of civilians, including the leading physicist Lord Kelvin and R.E. Froude of the Admiralty Experimental Works, with Fisher himself serving as president. When the board first met in January of 1905, they discussed the battleship they wanted to build, which turned out to be Dreadnought. We discussed that in the first video, link in the description. But when it came to the battlecruiser, they had some desires. I should also mention they were still calling it an armored cruiser at this point. Regardless, they wanted a speed of 25.5 knots, an armament of 12-inch guns, anti-torpedo boat guns, armor in the same scales as the Minotaur class, and suitable dimensions for docking facilities. We're to take from Roberts again. The committee first turned its attention to the battleship design before moving on to the armored cruiser, which at this stage was the only cruiser type under construction. The initial design, known as A, was prepared by the Director of Naval Construction, C.H. Croxford. Following instructions from both the DNC and A.W. White, the DNC provided a broad outline for the ship, and on December 28th, Design A was approved with an armament of 8 12-inch 305mm guns rather than the 10 eventually adopted. The machinery was specified as turbines, capable of producing 25.5 knots, with protection broadly comparable to that of Minotaur. However, when Croxford received his detailed instructions the following day, the turbines were replaced with reciprocating engines. It's worth noting that despite Bacon's claim that by the 21st of October, the sketch designs for Dreadnought and Invincible were effectively complete and required little further alteration, none of the armored cruiser sketches survived, and the final designs for both the battleship and the armored cruiser were produced entirely by the DNC's department after this point. The committee, with some difficulty, studied several proposals, A, B, C, D, and E. The designs themselves were fairly similar, so it's not worth diving into them that much. Just know the committee, after much debate, decided on Design E, with some modifications. What is interesting, in my opinion, are the differences between the Minotaur and Invincible classes, which, taking from R.A. Burt's British Battleships of World War I, won a nominal displacement increase of 2,650 tons. Length increase was now 48 feet, with beam and draft increase of 4 feet and 6 feet respectively. 2 8 12-inch and 16 4-inch against 4 9.2-inch and 10 7.5-inch. 3 turbine machinery of 41,000 shaft horsepower against 27,000 shaft horsepower with reciprocating machinery. So the increase in speed, size, and armament was substantial. Truly something. Before we continue, I should note the particulars of the ship. Here they are as found in Burt and Roberts. Another thing I'd like to mention is the secrecy of the construction. Like Dreadnought, the construction of the vessels was carried out in great secrecy, and at Fisher's instigation, erroneous reports were circulated implying that the design was merely a development of the Minotaur class. This misled the German Admiralty so much that they started construction of their own large armored cruiser, HMS Blucher, by far and away a worse vessel than the Invincible class and everything but armor. Like our video on Dreadnought, I decided to break down the development of Invincible into individual components, so we'll talk about the armor, armament, and machinery. I decided fire control wasn't as important in this case, so go watch Dreadnought's video for details on that. The speed at which the Invincibles was constructed wasn't as rapid as Dreadnought was kind of a guinea pig of sorts for a lot of the ideas as found in the Invincible class, so things like the machinery. Anyway, the first of the Invincible class was laid down 4 months after Dreadnought, and didn't complete until 1908. In this case, I think we'll talk about the armor first, as it's a critical component of the Invincible class, and their story. When it comes to the armor of the vessels, in accordance with the Admiralty's instructions to the committee, which was largely subordinated to armament and speed, was on the same scale as the immediately preceding Minotaur class of armored cruisers. Although attacked by medium caliber, long-range shell fire, such as might be anticipated in the cruiser role for which these ships were primarily intended, it was quite incapable of withstanding the heavy caliber projectiles to which they would be exposed in their alternative role as part of the battle fleet. Looking at the armor section of their particulars, their horizontal protection was particularly weak, in which Philip Watts recorded that the Admiralty requirements called for protection only against flat trajectories at about 9,000 yards, and that with a displacement limit of approximately 17,000 tons, no weight was available to increase the thickness of the deck armor, although realizing the danger of plunging shell fire from heavy calibers at 15,000 yards and over. The possibility of battles with heavy caliber shells being fired at over 15,000 yards of range wasn't appreciated at the time in the design circles where it mattered, i.e. the design committee. Others like Captain Mark Kerr pointed this out when he commanded Invincible in 1909. There are only a couple more things in the armored section that I'd like to point out. The first being the belt armor of 6 inches. It's comparable to the Minotaur class and not a capital ship of such size. For such a demonstration, here's an illustration as found in British Battleships 1906 to 1946 by Dr. Norman Friedman. I believe it speaks for itself, but as we've mentioned, for the role she was intended for, it made sense to a certain extent. Also, the barbette armor was 7 inches, again lightly armored compared to other capital ships of such a size. We could sit here and discuss the armor up and down and bring up Jetland, but I think I've beaten that dead horse plenty. I'll let you all discuss that in the comments. When it comes to her machinery, she had 4 sets of Parsons direct drive turbines and 31 large tube boilers. The machinery was a large change from the previous reciprocating machinery. The machinery was a large part of this revolution that came with Invincible and Dreadnought, as the new turbines saved weight, were more efficient, and allowed for a greater speed. The issue that we discussed in our video on Dreadnought was not if the turbines would work, but if they would work in a ship as large as Dreadnought and Invincible. Through testing on cruisers, destroyers, and of course Dreadnought, it was proven that the machinery would work in a ship as large as Dreadnought. Going back to the development of the designs a little bit here, a lot of the earlier designs had reciprocating machinery instead of direct drive turbines. Fisher stressed the importance of these direct drive turbines, stressing that they were part of the revolution of these new class of warships, in that this new machinery would be able to maintain a speed advantage over other existing cruisers. It was anticipated that the new cruisers from foreign powers might have a speed of 24 knots. It was considered necessary to exceed that figure, so like I mentioned, they were fitted with Parsons direct drive turbines and 4 screws. The high pressure turbines were fitted on the wing shafts and the low pressure ones on the inner shafts. With their arrangements upon their completion, the vessels had the most powerful machinery of any warship afloat. On their trials, they blew past the suspected top speed of the foreign cruisers, with Invincible achieving a 26.64 knot top speed, a truly amazing achievement considering this new class of warships. When it comes to armament, this is where things get interesting, and I'd like to take from Bert to start us off. One of the very early alternative layouts showed 10 9.2-inch and 5 twin turrets, arranged as in Dreadnought, but as the committee had discussed the 9.2-inch gun, only the designs with 12-inch armament were considered. The 12-inch guns were finally adopted on the grounds that the ships were required to run down and destroy any other cruiser then in existence. This was the primary role, but they should also be capable of forming a fast division to supplement the battle fleet, and perhaps attack the van of an enemy fleet. The uniform heavy caliber armament adopted for these new ships provided maximum destructive effect, together with the greatest possible accuracy and efficiency in long-range fire control. On the basis of the Admiralty requirements, the main armament of 8 12-inch guns was the maximum amount, with a speed of 25 knots, protection similar to that of the Minotaur class, and dimensions conforming to existing docks. A primary requirement was the capability for maximum fire ahead, unhindered by blast interference from individual turrets. The value of powerful ahead fire for engaging a retreating enemy had been particularly stressed by Lord Fisher, and was in contrast to the requirements for Dreadnought, where heavy weight and broadside was the primary objective. So, the plans for the cruiser type were very distinctive, and the final arrangement was not in any way a discarded design for the battleship, i.e. Dreadnought. The final plan, with the midships turret arrangement in close echelon and allowing a nominal all-round fire of 6 guns with a good command for 3 of the 4 turrets, was considered the best that could be produced with the available beam and length. The Invincible class carried 8 12-inch 45 caliber Mark 10 guns, the same ones as in Dreadnought in the Lord Nelson class. Because of anticipated blast effects, there was never any intention of providing an 8-gun broadside by placing the midship guns in echelon, and the most that was expected was to maintain a 6-gun broadside over a limited arc of fire if the other turret became inoperable. So the main battery of the Invincible class was on par with contemporary battleships like Dreadnought, but having that distinct advantage in speed, they could overpower any cruiser that they would meet on the high seas, and possibly be able to fight in a fast division during a fleet action, to varying degrees of success as Jutland showed. Yes, I said I know I wasn't going to harp on it, but I just had to say it. Debate it in the comments or go watch this video. Before I forget, a slight deviation from Dreadnought was the addition of 4-inch anti-torpedo boat guns, a slight upgrade compared to Dreadnought. With the size increase in destroyers, it just made sense. The battlecruisers developed into a role they really weren't built for, a fast arm of the battle fleet. This alternative role didn't really suit the early designs of the Invincible class, and especially the Indefatigable class. Later battlecruisers like the Splendid Cats were more capable of taking damage. I mean, take a look at Lion during Jutland. Regardless, I think the idea of a heavily armed and fast capital ship was a turning point in naval warfare, just like Dreadnought. Hopefully you found this video interesting, as I've really enjoyed talking about the designs of both Dreadnought and Invincible. Anyway, please remember to like and subscribe as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have an amazing week.